Hi, all. Welcome to week 7 of EDPE 241. Just about a week and a half left to go until our trip together in the exciting second phase of the course, which is why you all signed up, but a little more work to do in the meantime. This is our last week of regular assignments as well, so that will be exciting, hopefully, for you in easing some of the work next week, as I'm sure many of you have lots of finals and stuff going on. So anyway, diving into this week, week 7. Just some information for you to prepare you for the week. This week's topic is social issues in sports and sports sociology. So I'll just talk briefly about that to frame the week a little bit, mention the assignments, and talk about some pre-trip paperwork and forms that are needed. Without further ado, jumping into the topic of social issues in sports. Some of you may have taken EDPE 220. If you have already, this is probably more of a survey of that course. That course probably dives a lot more in depth into some of the things we'll talk about. But it's a good, interesting course and a good, interesting topic. I think that as much as sports are sort of on their own plane, their own playing field, no pun intended, there is no doubt that social issues impact sports in so many ways, and people come to sports with their own sort of values and backgrounds, and sports impart certain cultures on people. If you meet a soccer players are often very different than fencers, largely because of the cultures that they're part of in those sports sometimes even. So really interesting to think about how those play into it. There's sort of two different sections of this. The first is sports sociology. This is very much academic discipline, a sociological discipline, really looking at how patterns and cultures and all that emerge from sports. So an example of that might be fan attendance in college football, or traditions around college football are really interesting things to look at. Tailgating in the South where you have 100,000 people, or in the Big Ten Conference or the Pac-10, any of the above, where you have 100,000 people in the parking lot, and only 70,000 people can get into the game, but all those people come to be part of that event is very different than our experience here in the Northeast, where that's not so much a thing. So social issues in sports, there's a number of different ones, and you'll all explore some yourself this week as well. But just to highlight a few really quick, role of the media. One thing that's been really interesting is social media and how it's changed sports. This particular gentleman feels that social media has ruined sports. Regardless of if you feel that way or not, there's no doubt that it's changed how we interact with sports, whether folks are posting things on their Twitter pages, you're interacting with athletes in that way, whether you're following games or scores in that way, or trade deadlines, or any of the above. The way in which we're interacting with athletes and teams and all that is varying differently because of the media's impact on that, and then particularly social media these days. Another one is violence in sports. Here's a very interesting article on the sociological history of soccer violence. So a big thing that we can see in this is kind of the social and cultural rifts that manifest themselves. If you represent one side of town, you're a fan of one team. If you represent the other side, you're a fan of the other team. Oftentimes, who you support comes to be part of your social fabric. And sometimes, as we know, nationalities, ethnicities, religions, who you support can lead to things that aren't always as positive as they're intended to be. So soccer and sports are not immune whatsoever. While we think of soccer hooliganism as largely a European thing, oftentimes there's been no doubt there's been violence at football games, ethnic slurs at hockey and basketball games, and baseball. So we're not immune from sort of this bit of violence in our country as well. That can manifest itself in sports. Another is drug use in sports. It's an interesting one, thinking about the Olympics and the Russian team most recently, and the prevalence of that, or Lance Armstrong and cycling and all of the above. Title IX and gender issues are also a very interesting one. There's a great organization called the Women in Sports Foundation. They continue to do a lot of really good work to advocate for getting more women involved in sports. One of the things that they found in their research, they continue to find as well, participation numbers are rising. Opportunities in administration and coaching have not risen quite as quickly, and that there continues to be a significant pay gap for some of the same work. So really interesting to see some of their research as well as a lot of their initiatives to try to get more people involved. So an interesting movie coming out that they're talking about too. One last issue, one that is particularly interesting to me, and we read about it a little earlier when talking about community and youth sports, is Project Play, and particularly looking at some of the declining participation numbers in youth sports and just how some different social issues are manifesting through that. And so if we look here, you'll see that there's a decline in a number of sports, some that are more traditional, that are having issues either with interest or concerns over safety. And so on and so forth. So regardless, our societal views are changing the participation of that, and is leading to some potential societal issues in terms of lower physically active youth means potential for higher rates of obesity in our country, which has lots of health and financial consequences as well. An interesting thing, too, is if you look at the demographics here of who plays sports, you'll notice boys start much earlier than girls. If you're white, you start much earlier than African Americans. You start much earlier than Hispanic children. If you look at married versus unmarried, it has a big difference on who participates. And then household income as well has a significant difference on who plays sports. So while we often think of sports as this great equalizer, it's all about your talent. The numbers are showing that might not necessarily be the case. And a lot of that is because of the way things have changed. The era of sandlot and unstructured play is long gone, meaning you really need access to different things, whether it be travel teams or facilities or programs. So it's a really interesting one to think about as well. So moving on into our readings and assignments for this week, Chapter 18 in Contemporary Sports Management, give that a good view. I'm also sending along a link to a sports sociology article. It's not super long. It's a little bit more dense, but please give it at the very least a skim. It'll give you a nice little breakdown between sports sociology and social issues and some of the additional issues more so than your textbook will as well. For your assignments this week, you're going to pick an issue, a social issue in sports, summarize the issue, and give us some sort of graphical or visual representation of it, whether that be a table, an infographic, or a creative drawing to tell us about what that is as well. And then we have the discussion forums as well. And so we've got 3 of those this week. So first one looks at transgender athletes, and there was a very interesting case last winter regarding the wrestling tournament in Texas and a transgender athlete. So take a little time, read 2 very different articles, or not very different, but kind of different perspectives on that, and think about how that should go. You can identify social issue. You're already doing this for your assignments. This can be pretty brief, but I think it'd be valuable for you all to share what you think is important. And just last week, there was an article on the Mavericks front office, which really overlapped with the Me Too movement, and toxic cultures and workplaces in sports are showing not to be immune from this movement. And it's a really fascinating article. So as a sports manager, it'd also be interesting to think how you can prevent those cultures and environments and create healthy environments. I do want to mention that thus far, folks have been really impressive on the discussion groups. I'd like you to keep doing that. This is a particularly sensitive topic. There's can be lots of different thought processes and ideas. So just remember that while it's okay to disagree, we want to disagree civilly, which means we pick our words properly. We are open to other people's ideas as well, even if we disagree with them too. And so I'm confident that you all will do that, but given the topic, a good reminder. As well, in the email, you'll see a few different forms. The first is a YogaWorks waiver. I should have brought this to class. I didn't realize they needed it so soon. In the past, they've let us do it in person, but I do need these from you by next week. So it's going to be attached. Please drop it off on my desk or scan it back to me. And I do need those by next week. So please make sure they get done. Special Olympics registration, if you haven't already done it, needs to be done. And finally, I'm sending along a link to a Google form for the pre-trip questionnaire. So if you can take a couple minutes to read through that and just give me some of your basic information, I'll make sure that we're nice and organized. And as well, I do my best on food stuff as well, because food's obviously very important. So that's what we got going on this week. I am looking forward to seeing you all soon.